Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Cornwell, and I'm the Marketing Director and Business Development Director here at Plunkett Cooney. It's my pleasure to serve as coordinator for today's webinar, which is co-sponsored by our firm's governmental law and cannabis law practice groups. As you may know, the decriminalization of cannabis and issues related to medical marijuana remain among the hottest topics in the law today. With recreational cannabis now legal in Michigan, many communities are grappling with the complex business and regulatory licensing issues. Here today, to help make sense of all of it, are three of our most experienced municipal and cannabis attorneys, Bob Marzano, Saul Michelonis, and Jeff Schroeder. Before we get started, I'd like to take just a few moments to provide you with some background about our law firm and today's presenters. For those of you who don't know, Plunkett Cooney is based in Southeast Michigan and is one of the Midwest's oldest and largest law firms with approximately 150 attorneys. We have offices in 8 Michigan cities, as well as in Chicago, Illinois, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Columbus, Ohio. Plunkett Cooney is one of Michigan's most experienced and accomplished firms in the areas of municipal law and litigation. Our firm serves as panel counsel to the Michigan Municipal League Liability and Property Pool, and our attorneys directly represent numerous governmental entities across the state. The firm also has a robust corporate practice, which includes extensive expertise in the area of cannabis law. Our attorneys are some of the most experienced legal service providers to Michigan's cannabis industry, and they have secured some of the state's first business licenses under the framework established by the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. With us today, as I mentioned, are Bob Marzano, Saul Michelonis, and Jeff Schroeder. Bob serves as co-leader of Plunkett Cooney's Torts and Litigation Practice Group, and he's also a member of our governmental law practice group. He has served for 20 years as Plymouth City Attorney and for 15 years as Northville City Attorney, and he's well-versed in all aspects of municipal law, and he routinely defends his clients in litigation involving claims of premises liability, retail liability, and motor vehicle liability. Saul serves as co-leader of Plunkett Cooney's Cannabis Law Industry Group. With a busy practice in such complex areas as environmental and energy law, Saul is always on the cutting edge when new legal issues arise, including medical marijuana and the more recent legalization of recreational cannabis. He works with his clients to help obtain cannabis business licenses and to remain compliant with state and local regulations. And finally, Jeff Schroeder is a former Assistant Michigan Attorney General and Assistant City Attorney in the City of Warren. Jeff's background and diverse practice have allowed him to become one of the go-to attorneys in Michigan when it comes to cannabis business licensing process. He represents some of the earliest and largest cannabis business licensees in Michigan, and he regularly counsels municipalities on the various aspects of cannabis law and the state's business licensing process. Now just a couple housekeeping notes about today's program. For the Q&A portion of our webinar, we're going to use our questions window on your GoToWebinar navigation display. If you could, please take a moment now to locate the window and feel free to enter questions as they occur to you during the program. At the end of the presentation, we'll try to answer as many as possible, but with one caveat. If you can, please ask questions of a more general nature. Discussing specifics or ongoing issues in your community or business is best done privately, as we are sure you would agree. Finally, I want to mention that today's session is being recorded, and that recording will be available on the event page of Plunkett Cooney's website, which is located at www.plunkettcooney.com. Thanks again for attending today's webinar. It's time for me to now turn it over to Saul Michelonis. I believe you are first up. So, Saul, take it away.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I hope everybody's having a good Thursday thus far. I'm going to do a quick presentation giving the layout of what the statutes are that are relevant to cannabis in Michigan. So the regulation of cannabis in Michigan revolves around 3 statutes: the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, and the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act. The first 2 pertain to medical use, while the third revolves around recreational use. Under the MMMA, licensed caregivers provide medical cannabis to up to 5 registered medical patients with medical cannabis cards. Each patient or caregiver on behalf of a patient is allowed up to 2.5 ounces of usable cannabis or 12 cannabis plants, which must be kept locked and secured. Municipalities, though they have tried, cannot restrict a caregiver or a patient from owning or growing cannabis in a manner consistent with the MMMA. That's been a heavily litigated matter over the years. In 2016, the Michigan legislature passed the MMFLA, or we'll call it the Facilities Act, because I'm getting tired of saying MM, to establish some parameters for the growth, distribution, and use of cannabis for medicinal purposes. The Facilities Act establishes a medical marijuana licensing board and within the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, or LARA. The board may grant up to 5 types of state operating licenses in the following categories: a Class A, B, or C grower, a processor, a provisioning center, secure transporter, and a safety compliance facility. The Facility Act also allows the stacking of some types of licenses. In 2018, voters passed a measure legalizing the use, manufacture, and sale of cannabis for recreational purposes. Like the Facilities Act, the municipality may select the types of operations to exclude or include if it decides not to opt out. Under both statutes, control of the types, numbers, and locations of licensed facilities are totally within the control of the local government. Next slide. All right. So cannabis, whether recreational or medicinal, remains a Schedule I drug under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. While there remains some minimal protections at the federal level for use of cannabis for medicinal purposes, there are none for recreational purposes. Under the Controlled Substances Act, a Schedule I drug is one that officially has no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Much of the effort to decriminalize cannabis at the federal level revolves around delisting cannabis as a Schedule I drug. Now, Congress has restricted the use of funding to the Department of Justice to use monies in its budget to prosecute federal offenses for medical cannabis in states that have decriminalized it. This does not apply to recreational sales, however. A recent statement by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Michigan indicated the office will continue to prosecute activities illegal under federal law, but not low-level offenders, especially as it relates to adverse effects of interstate traffic in marijuana, the involvement of other illegal drugs or illegal activity, persons with criminal records, the presence of firearms or violence, criminal enterprises, gangs and cartels, the bypassing of local laws and regulations, the potential for environmental contamination and risks to minors. Non-medical use of cannabis has been decriminalized in 13 states and legal in 10. 33 states have provided for the medical use of cannabis. And by decriminalization, I mean that while not legal, possession and use of small amounts will not result in criminal charges. Next slide. The Recreational Act provides significant power for municipalities to regulate recreational cannabis. Under the Facilities Act, municipalities had to affirmatively opt in to allow state licensed medical cannabis businesses within their borders. However, under the Recreational Act, the municipality must affirmatively opt out of it if it does not want state licensed recreational businesses operating within its jurisdiction. Like the Facilities Act, the municipality may select the types of operations to exclude or include if it decides not to opt out. Municipalities that have opted in for medical cannabis are not required to elect to participate in the recreational program. Next slide. Licenses are available under the recreational program in the following categories: microprocessor, which is a grower of fewer than 150 plants; grower, they also have Class A, B, and C licenses; processor, retailer, microbusiness, secure transportation, and safety compliance. As to retail cannabis operations, for 24 months after accepting applications, LARA can only accept applications for retail establishments from persons holding a state operating license pursuant to the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. That medical cannabis provisioning center must still obtain a separate license for recreational distribution in a manner consistent with state and local requirements. While the first licenses will be issued to existing medical cannabises beginning in December 2021, the licensing process will likely open to any non-medical cannabis operators in municipalities that have not opted out after that date. Also, note that there's no such requirement for Class A growers, microbusinesses, or safety compliance facilities. Medical cannabis retail activities will continue in conjunction with recreational sales. In other words, it won't be the case that medical retailing will stop in lieu of recreational retailing. At least initially, the operator would need to hold a medical cannabis retail license in order to obtain the recreational retailing license. And again, just a reminder, just because a community is allowed medical cannabis doesn't mean that they're forced to accept recreational. That's a separate decision. Next slide. So we're going to talk in this slide, we're going to talk about certain specifics under the Facilities Act. And from time to time, you'll hear Bob Marzano opt in to discuss part of his presentation. So under the opt-in and opt-out, as I said before, municipalities under the Facilities Act had to affirmatively opt in to allow state licensed medical cannabis businesses within their borders. However, under the Recreational Act, a municipality must affirmatively opt out if it does not want state licensed recreational businesses operating within its jurisdiction.
Yes. One of the things as a city attorney that I noticed occurring with numerous city as well as township attorneys regarding the new the Recreation Act is that when its effective date approached, there was a great concern about opting out immediately. I know that from some of the municipalities I've worked with, their concern was that the statute is less than clear, or the proposal, I'm sorry, which became law, is less than clear as far as the application process. Although Laura is required to come up, and we'll discuss this in a second, with an application procedure, if a applicant submitted an application to Laura the day after the proposal became law, the concern at the municipal level, or the city level and township levels were that, well, that could relate back to, you know, whether we had an ordinance in place at the time the application was submitted. To be safe, we're going to go ahead and opt out right now. That way, if somebody applies, say, for a license tomorrow, even though Laura has no regulations in place or application procedure, the concern was that Laura could come back and say, well, as of March 1st, XYZ applied for a license. We're going to look at what ordinance you had in place on March 1st of 2019, and since you didn't have one, opting out, we're going to go ahead and grant that license. Again, I don't think that's going to be a problem, but there was a great concern with the municipalities over that issue, and for that reason, everybody wanted to get on board and opt out that was going to opt out as soon as possible. Another issue that I've seen cropping up with the opt and opt out is a sunset provision. Some municipalities have just flat out said we're going to opt out, period. I've seen other municipalities who actually put a sunset provision in the resolution saying we're going to opt out, but as of a certain date in the future, this resolution will expire, which will force the municipality to once again take a look at their decision as to whether or not to opt in or opt out. Just because you opt out at one point in time doesn't mean the municipality can't change its mind and decide to opt in.
All right, and so moving on from that, we'll talk about the state regulation timeline. The Recreational Act gives a state regulating entity, the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, or LARA, 12 months to promulgate regulations for licensing of recreational cannabis businesses. Given that LARA has experience in development of the medical program, the rollout of recreational cannabis regulations theoretically should move more smoothly. One point on whether the state would give a license to a facility in an opt-out area before that end of that period of time, one of those requirements will probably be to show that you've gotten approval to operate within that community, be my guess. But go ahead, Bob.
Well, another concern that we had at the municipal level is what happens if the state of Michigan fails to do its job within 12 months of the act or the proposal becoming law. And the way the act reads is then the applicant can then go to the municipality to apply for a license. And of course, they're going to go to the municipality and say, well, let's take a look at your ordinance. Assuming that Laura doesn't get their act together and do what they're supposed to do in the 12 months, if a municipality did not have an ordinance in place, it would be quite difficult to say no or to provide any type of regulation from a municipal level. However, if a municipality opted out, they made it very simple. If you came to a community that opted out and said, well, Laura doesn't have any regulations, so according to the law, we come to you, we'd say, great, we have an ordinance in place right now that says we have opted out and will not permit these facilities to be within our city. Thank you, have a nice day. So that was another reason why, over concern about the state's timeline, that the municipalities wanted to protect themselves.
And nothing to add is that earlier this week, Laura issued a bulletin saying that it was creating stakeholder groups for the purposes of recreational. one of the four stakeholder groups that they're setting up includes municipalities that are interested in becoming involved in the process of developing regulations for recreational. So if go to the LARA website, you can probably find that bulletin, or you can email me and I could provide you that bulletin. So if you're interested in having an input, that might be a good place to start. But what happens if the municipality doesn't opt out? Well, if LARA doesn't promulgate regulations within 12 months, then applicants can submit their applications directly to the municipality, as Bob noted, that has opted in or not opted out. The municipality will be required to issue a decision within 90 days and notify LARA that it has issued a municipal license. It would have the same effect as a state license. Now, if you decide not to opt in or decide to opt out, that might not be the end of it. In the event a municipal government decides to opt out, it doesn't necessarily bar state license operations in that jurisdiction, surprisingly. The Recreational Act allows citizen petitions to initiate an ordinance to allow cannabis operations, but also allows petitions to completely bar them too. In determining whether or not to opt out, a municipality may want to consider the political temperature of its electorate, because whatever decision it makes may be altered through an initiative.
This was a significant issue to be considered, that was considered by city councils, commissions, and township boards. The one side of the coin argument was, well, hold it. Our community just voted to approve this proposal. How can you, as the ruling body, now substitute your judgment in for that of your citizens of your city or township by saying we're not going to allow dispensaries or medical marijuana facilities within our city when they approved it? The other side of the coin was, well, if you read the ballot language, for the most part, first of all, the whole proposal wasn't in the ballot, and two, most people were voting to legalize the recreational use of marijuana, not to actually have the facilities within your local town selling the marijuana or growing the marijuana or transporting the marijuana or doing whatever else besides just simply allowing people to do it. Interestingly, in at least one of the cities I represent, we expected we would see some type of citizen comment or at least some type of, involvement from the community when the motion to opt out was made. Not one word was heard. Not one person spoke. So again, it certainly is a possibility out there, but when you're taking a look at, hey, what did our citizens vote for? I think if you took a poll in your city or put the ballot issue on separately saying, A, do you approve marijuana use, as opposed to do you want to have a dispensary within your municipal boundaries, you could get a different result on the vote B.
All right. Now, on the last bullet point is zoning considerations. So with respect to zoning, LARA will approve an application if the property where the proposed marijuana establishment is to be located is not within an area zoned exclusively for residential use and is not within 1,000 feet of pre-existing public or private school providing education in kindergarten or any of the grades 1 through 12, unless a municipality adopts an ordinance that reduces the distance requirement. By negative implication, we believe that a municipality cannot make it more restrictive. There's nothing in the Recreational Act that specifically preempts local governments from enacting zoning requirements that are not inconsistent with the Act. Pursuant to the statute, a municipality may adopt other ordinances that are not unreasonably impracticable and do not conflict with this Act or any rule promulgated pursuant to this Act. So we believe that municipalities' full regulatory scope remains in place to the extent it is not inconsistent with the specific provisions of the statute.
And from a municipal point of view, this opens up a can of worms as far as how do we regulate this, how do we zone this, where do we put these facilities, can we fit these facilities within our municipal boundaries? I can't say that the decision to opt out has anything to do solely with zoning, but certainly I think that's a consideration taken into place just due to the headaches of what the municipality would have to go through as far as their planning commission, their planners, and their eventual governing body to come up with a change to the master plan that exists or change to their zoning boundaries or zoning map as far as where we put these places. So again, it just creates more of a burden on the municipality as far as how to deal with the ramifications of this particular law.
All right, next slide, please. So while we're talking about what the municipality can do, there are some restrictions on what the municipality can do under the statute. Even if a municipality opts out, it will not be able to prevent its citizens from owning and using cannabis recreationally within its jurisdiction. This includes anyone over the age of 21 to possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis on their person, up to 10 ounces of cannabis in their residence under lock, or up to 12 plants. The other thing is restrictions on transportation. You can't restrict people from transporting cannabis through your jurisdiction. Also, you can, as long as it's not advertised, a person may transfer up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis to another person over the age of 21 in your jurisdiction. We have been reading about some deals where people are buying T-shirts and getting a side benefit of cannabis, and that has some questionable legality. Jeff?
Yeah, as a former prosecutor, I'm not buying what they're calling the gift exemption. I remember many years ago when eBay was new, and you could go on eBay and buy a Bic pen for $200 and then get 4 free tickets to the Rolling Stone concert. And to me, that's a sham transaction. And in Michigan, you need a license to actually sell marijuana. And if you're going through this sham transaction and you're actually selling marijuana, I think that's not going to last very long. There are some entrepreneurs out there who are pushing this, and it's really a major concern. And I think eventually the state police and local jurisdictions are going to get together and put an end to this. I mean, the Liquor Control Commission would not let me sell Tito's vodka at a garage sale when I was giving buy my old T-shirt for $30 and here's a free bottle of Tito's.
Or the pencil at the Blind Pig Party.
Right. So
Anyway, so those are some of the restrictions on what municipalities can do. Next slide. So what can you do? Well, there's reasonable restrictions on public signs. There will be, most likely in the recreational statute or regulations, specific limitations on what types of signs, what they can say, and where they can be. The municipality also has an opportunity to chime in on that as well. So that is within your jurisdiction, despite what Laura will allow. You'll be able to put some control on it if you're a municipality. You can also regulate the time, place, and manner of operation and the sale of accessories related to cannabis use, and those are head shops. So you just because of the recreational statute doesn't mean that you could sell a one-hitter at the Rite Aid if that's not allowed under your statute and regulations. So you still have the power to do that. You can also authorize, and this is an interesting thing, the sale for consumption at establishments accessible to only persons over 21 years old for special events or for a limited time. So this will be very interesting. So now we're not talking about the hash bash in Ann Arbor, which has been going on for quite some time, especially if you're a Michigan grad. You're very familiar with that. But I can totally imagine that bars or perhaps tobacco businesses, things like that, sending a temp and applying for a license if the municipality allows it for short-term use for specific events. I don't know, maybe the 4th of July, who knows? But anyway, Bob?
All of these potential regulations and ordinance changes just again go to the burden that is being placed on municipalities and how to deal with this new law. We've had to deal with this at the level of alcohol, going to the consumption for special events or limited time. I know many municipalities have struggled with, beer tents at festivals or requests for certain exemptions under their liquor laws. We're not going to see that with marijuana. And I see in the future, you're going to get a fight between the alcohol folks and the marijuana folks by saying, well, hey, you're letting the marijuana folks do this, but you're not letting the alcohol folks do this under your ordinances, or vice versa. So this, if you opt in, you really are going to have to go through your code of ordinances to try to figure out how are you going to fit in these new regulations and this new use within your city. Now, some of this stuff's coming anyway. Some of it you're going to have to deal with whether you like it or not, because the state law mandates that it is not illegal to possess or smoke marijuana. So everyone is going to have to go through some of these changes. As far as the actual sale, advertising, stuff like that, that's something that will be unique to an opt-in community versus an opt-out community.
Next slide. There we go. All right, so what else can a municipality do? They can establish fines of not more than $500 for civil infractions for violations of a municipality's ordinances once those are developed. So that's it, that's the cap. You can also require a facility to obtain a municipal license as long as the requirements for such license are not in conflict with state laws and regulations. Now that shouldn't be too big of a surprise because that's happening right now under the Facilities Act on the medical marijuana, where local communities do have specific requirements and actual licensing requirements. Every city is different. Some cities have gone to the point where their application is just as onerous as the state's application. Others have a lottery system. Others first come, first serve. There would be any number of ways you can issue a municipal license, and each community will have to decide for itself how they want to go. And you can also charge an annual $5,000 fee to defray the municipality's costs for applications, administration, or enforcement. So that's $5,000 per facility. And so that concludes my presentation. Bob, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things. As far as enforcement is concerned, I know that the local police departments are having a heck of a time trying to get their arms around this. There's going to be issues as far as, can I see the marijuana plants in someone's yard, to I'm having a backyard barbecue for my 1-year-old baby's birthday and I'm smelling marijuana from my neighborhood, as opposed to the person walking down the street smoking a joint, or when you pull over somebody and you suspect the person's under the influence of marijuana. So these are going to be struggles that will be developing, that we'll have to develop throughout the local municipalities as well as the state. Just real quick, as far as defraying of costs and monies the municipality may receive, as far as if they choose to opt in, under the new law, in addition to other taxes, an excise tax is imposed upon each marijuana retailer and each marijuana micro business, and it's at a rate of 10% of the sales price for marijuana sold or otherwise transferred to anyone under the through the marijuana establishment. This is for recreational marijuana. The Department of Treasury is given the task of administering the taxes imposed under the Act. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Funds for the initial activities of the Department of Treasury to implement the Act have to be appropriated from the general fund, and the department then shall repay any amount appropriated under the subsection from proceeds back to the general fund. Next, the department is to expend money in the fund first for implementation, administration, and enforcement of the Act. So essentially to pay itself back in the state back. And second, until the year 2022, or at least 2 years after the Act becomes effective, to provide $20 million to defined institutions to study the efficacy of marijuana in treating the medical conditions of United States Armed Services veterans and preventing veteran suicide. Upon appropriation and unexpended balances, the Department of Treasury will then allocate 15% to municipalities in which a marijuana retail store or marijuana microbusiness is located, and then allocate a proportion to the number of marijuana, and this will be allocated in relation to the number of marijuana retail stores and microbusinesses within the municipality. Although it is anticipated that the money that recreational marijuana will bring in as far as taxes will be quite high, there is a lot of folks that have to be paid before, and a lot of money that has to be paid before it trickles down to the municipality to get their 15% cut. So the question still remains, is this a potential money-making operation for a municipality? Clearly the $5,000 fee annually is not a windfall by any means. As far as what the municipality may see, depending on the size of the municipality, if you have 1 or 2 operations, you're not going to see a ton of tax, potentially not see a ton of tax money.
Right, but again, if a municipality is looking at this purely from a money-making perspective, there are other reasons to opt in.
Sure.
Because you might have areas that need development. You might just want to make your constituents happy. So it could be anything. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to pass it off to Jeff.
Thanks very much. My portion of the presentation is to explain the lessons we have learned and are learning from the MMFLA, the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. So to talk about the opt-in decision, which we heard earlier, the automatic opt-in in the recreational law versus the affirmative opt-in from a municipality under the medical marijuana law. The drafters of the recreational law, I think, got a little too cute, and people in the industry saw how hard it is to get some municipalities to opt in, and they thought that they could, place a provision in the law that would automatically opt in a lot of communities and maybe catch them asleep at the switch. But thanks to sharp attorneys like Bob Marzano and other municipal attorneys in Michigan, we now know that 300 communities have voted to prohibit recreational facilities as of last week. And as we heard earlier, municipalities can't prohibit everything, and we heard the transportation issue. And on the transportation issue, we see that there's a transportation license that's available. And that transportation license will allow a facility with both local and state approval to transport marijuana product and cash from a grower to a retailer and so forth. But in the last week, there's a hot topic that's really sweeping across the cannabis community and the legal community in Michigan, and that is these unlicensed delivery services. And I think it's important for everyone to pay attention to this because this is a developing controversy this week. The Detroit News just had a big article the other day called "Unlicensed Medical Marijuana Delivery Flourishes in Metro Detroit." This was on Tuesday. And if you go to some of the sort of social media sites that promote marijuana businesses, including Weed Maps, you will see that there are literally dozens of unlicensed delivery individuals advertising their business on social media and on Weed Maps. And these are illegal businesses. You have individuals saying that they are marijuana delivery services and somehow going and obtaining product, we don't know from where, and delivering it to marijuana patients. These are not licensed transporters that go from facility to facility. This all started in December when LARA, the State Licensing and Regulatory Authority, adopted a rule allowing for delivery services. But they have yet to permit a single delivery service. These are all unlicensed and illegal. Under the LARA rule, a licensed provisioning center, a dispensary, can have an employee conduct deliveries. And those deliveries can only do 10 deliveries per trip. They have to file a manifest with LARA before they go on the trip. They have to have a GPS tracker. That delivery person has to be an employee of only one provisioning center. You can't have a delivery service that works for multiple facilities. And most importantly, you have to have a procedures and a plan approved by LARA before you can begin delivery. So as of today, again, dozens and dozens of illegal delivery services. In fact, in the Detroit News article, there was a man who identified his name and age and the name of his business, Mr. Guy's Caregivers, and there's a photo of him taking cash and handing a bag, which was like an old paper lunch bag, to an unknown patient in Macomb County. So the reason I'm pointing this out, it's a real hot topic this week, and if people are asking about it, this is not illegal. If they say LARA is allowing it, I talked to LARA the other day, and they said they have not yet permitted one provisioning center to begin delivery services. So that's something to keep our eye on. We talked earlier about, the opting in under medical marijuana. What have we learned from the opting in process? Under the MMFLA, silence is not acquiescence. A lot of communities sat on their hands, didn't want to make a decision. And we saw in cities where pro-marijuana facility advocates did ballot proposals. We saw it in Detroit, we saw it in Pontiac, and both in Detroit and Pontiac, the citizen initiatives passed. I will point out that those two communities and the other communities where it's been attempted are home rule cities with a city charter. They can do ballot proposals. Townships and villages, I don't see where you can do a ballot proposal. However, under the Recreational Act, there's a special ballot proposal provision under the new recreational law that says that individuals may petition to initiate an ordinance to provide for any number of marijuana establishments within a community or to prohibit marijuana establishments in a community. And you can get this on the ballot by having 5% of your registered voters sign the petition. Strike that, 5% of the votes cast for governor by qualified electors in the last gubernatorial election. So we had a 57% turnout in our gubernatorial election last fall. So in your community, you would look at the total number of votes cast for governor, multiply that by 5%, and that's the number of signatures you need to put a ballot proposal on the ballot. This arguably applies to townships and villages. We're not used to seeing townships and villages being subject to citizen initiative petitions because they don't have a charter. They're not subject to the Home Rule Cities Act. But under this new law, I think we're going to probably see a lot of ballot proposals. And under the Home Rule Cities Act, you have to get 5% of the registered voters. So if you're in a community with 100,000 registered voters, you need 5,000 signatures. Under the recreational law, you need 5% of the votes cast for governor in the last election. So if your community had an average turnout of 57%, you would only need 2,850 signatures instead of 5,000 signatures. So it's a lower signature threshold. I predict that come next year, we're going to be seeing a number of ballot proposals in outlying communities where individuals have been unable to persuade their elected officials to opt in and allow them to operate a facility. So again, we've had quite a bit of activity at the municipal level, and I have designed this slide called NIMBY versus election results, and Bob Marzano talked earlier about that. Not in my backyard. As a former full-time municipal attorney, I sat through literally hundreds of planning commission and zoning board meetings, and any type of land use decision is very difficult. You know, you see things like cell tower being proposed, even a new drugstore on the corner, a new McDonald's. Any land use decision is difficult. You add medical marijuana or cannabis, recreational cannabis to the mix, and it can become a very controversial issue. Our colleague here at Plunkett Cooney, Dennis Cowan, is former mayor of Royal Oak, and he sat through many meetings too, and he told me, and I laugh every time I hear it, when you go to a land use hearing, if one person shows up, it's a movement. If two people show up, it's a protest. If three people show up, it's a riot. So, and Dennis is right about that. People showing up and speaking their mind at land use hearings can have a tremendous effect. And if you look at the Medical Marijuana Act in 2008, it passed by a statewide margin of 63 to 37%. Last November, the recreational use passed 56 to 44%, pretty healthy margin. But if you drill down to the municipal level, there's a lot of communities that passed recreational marijuana by a margin of 70%. And as Bob alluded to earlier, this landslide margin doesn't necessarily translate into a mandate from the community to allow facilities. They're two separate questions. Some people may just generally support the concept of decriminalizing cannabis and marijuana. Doesn't mean that they want to have a marijuana dispensary at the end of their street. So that's sort of the issue that we're seeing develop. So the ballot proposal too that Bob mentioned, the wording on the ballot was very truncated. It was a 5,000 word plus statute that was adopted. So communities are right to hit the pause button and see what folks are thinking. And we do have a case study that's going on right now on the next slide, and it's Berkeley, not Berkeley, California, the left-wing coastal college town, but Berkeley, Michigan, which is a beautiful bedroom community with a nice downtown, great schools, very stable residential home values. And you look at Berkeley, nearly 70% of voters in this community approved recreational marijuana in the last election. And that alone has forced the city leaders to stop and take a look at this. And I believe Berkeley is going about it the right way. Berkeley actually sponsored a public meeting a couple weeks ago, and over 100 people showed up at the meeting. And according to an article I read, I wasn't there, it was in the Royal Oak Tribune, that over 100 people showed up and showed their support. Now, the article didn't say if all 100 people were literally residents of Berkeley. I suppose there were probably some advocates that are landowners or potential business owners that were in the mix. But overwhelmingly, it seemed like there was a lot of support for this concept. So the city sponsored an online survey, and the next slide shows that the online survey, which actually ended this week, showed that 62% of more than 1,600 people who participated in the survey supported allowing marijuana businesses. But 70% also agreed that they want to limit the number of facilities. I don't think there's anybody out there that, in a small community like this, that would say that they would allow an unlimited number of facilities. But interesting to me, when I looked at the rest of the survey results, among those who said yes, 97% supported having retailers, provisioning centers in the community. And that was the highest support for any type of facility in the survey. In my experience, one of the lessons learned from the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act is that the provisioning centers, the dispensaries, are the hardest uses to get a community to approve. It's the most difficult sell for someone in the marijuana industry to come to a community, knock on the door and say, I want to put a dispensary in your downtown, in your commercial district, on your major corridor. That's a very tough sell to municipal leaders, to planning commission, to city managers, and to mayors. But here, as the survey said, there was 97% support for the provisioning centers. And I think that part of the problem with that is that really early on in the industry in Michigan, we had cities like Detroit and Lansing and others that allowed marijuana caregiver centers to open 5 or 6 years ago. And I think it created sort of a negative image among those communities that did not have any facilities. You saw some buildings with neon lights and some names on the building that didn't indicate it was medical cannabis, but more along the lines of all the, funny names people use for marijuana. And it really doesn't look like an attractive use. And if you have a nice, safe, clean community, you don't want to plop a cinder block building with neon lights and, kind of look seedy. You don't want that look. And I think that has sort of set back, the approval of provisioning centers, licensed provisioning centers in some other communities. And also, again, I guess if you want my opinion, I think Berkeley's going about it the right way. They see that there's support in their community, but they're engaging the community on the specific question of, are we going to allow this? Is this going to be palatable to our residents? Are these facilities going to fit, and where are they going to be a good fit? So they're asking all the right questions. And I know the neighboring community of Royal Oak, which is on the other side of Woodward Avenue, is going through a very similar process now. Again, they're going about it the right way. So Berkeley is getting input from the community and stakeholders, and the 3 main questions they're going to look at are, which facilities are we allowing, how many, and where would they be permitted? And the where would they be permitted question goes to your regulatory and zoning ordinance, and on the next slide we discuss some of that. So state law requires that of the 5 licenses, growers need to be located in agricultural or industrial zone properties. So if you're going to allow 1,500 plant Class C grow, it has to be an industrial or agricultural zone property. You cannot put this in a commercial district. You cannot put this, in an office service district. It has to be zoned industrial or agricultural. The state law otherwise leaves all zoning decisions to the municipality. One key point, we've talked a lot about ballot proposals here. As it stands now in Michigan, you cannot use a ballot proposal to enact a zoning ordinance or to amend a zoning ordinance. That was attempted in Detroit in their municipal election in 2017. They adopted a regulatory ordinance and a zoning ordinance for marijuana facilities, opting into the MMFLA, and the zoning ordinance was held void by the Wayne County Circuit Court. And the reason was because basically you have to follow the Zoning Enabling Act and go through that process, and you can't zone with a ballot proposal. So the most that a ballot proposal can do is opt in and maybe limit the number of facilities and create some parameters, but as soon as the ballot proposal starts saying we will allow it in a I lost my train of thought. What was that, Saul? You had to correct me. Oh, the Class C licenses under recreational are 2,000 plants, and the Class C under medical are 1,500 plants. So again, my point was you can't zone through ballot proposals. But what are the zoning ordinance considerations? Of course, which zones to allow facilities? Again, no ballot proposal can say we're going to allow this in a C3 zone. That has to go through the process that Bob described earlier. Going through your planning commission, your planners, and getting the zoning ordinance updated. Another big issue is the buffer zones. The community can create any type of buffer zone they want. We see, 500 or 1,000 feet from schools, religious institutions, daycare facilities, drug rehab facilities, a certain amount of distance from residentially zoned property. And also we see restrictions on how close marijuana facilities can be to each other to avoid clustering, if that's what the community wants. And one of the biggest debates under these distance buffer areas is how do we measure the distance? There's a couple different measuring criteria. The most common is what we call as the crow flies from lot line to lot line. So you could have an ordinance that says you need to be 1,000 feet from a church or a religious institution, and you could be on the other side of a river from the religious institution, but you could be 800 feet as the crow flies from lot line to lot line, and it may be a 5-minute drive to get there based on how the roads are constructed in the area, but it's still less than 1,000 feet as the crow flies. Other communities are using door-to-door measurements from facility to facility, and others are using the Michigan Liquor Control Commission method, which is to start at the center line of the street and go from one location to the other location. So the actual distant measurements criteria can affect whether or not a particular piece of property is eligible to locate a marijuana business. Another thing we're finding is that in communities that begin the zoning discussion, you will see properties getting hot, like, red hot. And I've seen a number of communities where they've had a first draft of a zoning ordinance, and it's just a draft. And folks are going out, getting options on properties and areas that they think are included, and the price just goes through the roof. It's like a feeding frenzy. And then later you'll see that sometimes there's a new draft zoning ordinance, or they end up adopting something that doesn't include those properties. So there's a lot of folks out there sort of gambling on property because this is such a valuable license to have. That when you limit the number of licenses and you realize that there's a high demand for this product, these licenses can be extremely valuable. So onto the local approvals and application processes. One of the questions facing a municipality is, do you want to require pre-qualification by law? I've seen some municipalities that want to conduct their own background check and have the applicants submit all kinds of records and documents and sort through it and determine their suitability for a license. That's something you can do. The state has given municipalities a lot of power to make these decisions. But at the same time, the state has to pre-qualify these proposed licensees and give them a final facility license. The state is doing a rigorous background check. They have hired a well-respected corporate investigative firm to assist them with this. The state police assist them. They're doing fingerprints and background checks. They're looking into finances. They do a litigation check. And applicants are paying $6,000 to LARA for this. So the question is, why does the municipality want to bog itself down with doing all this research when the state is actually, frankly, doing a fine job itself at discovering any past issues an applicant may have? And if you watch any of these meetings, you'll see that some of the meetings, 50% or more of the applicants are being denied because they have tax or litigation issues, or they misled the board in their application and didn't disclose something that was material. So some municipalities are saying that they want to require pre-qualification before you can even apply for a license. So there's a lot of folks that are in process. It takes months in some cases, to get a decision from Laura and the board on your license application. And so some communities are pressured to allow some folks to apply even though they haven't been pre-qualified yet. Other communities are saying, no, you have to be pre-qualified. We don't want to waste our time with someone and go through your applications if you're never going to get a state license. So those are some decisions that communities look at. And so these competitive applications where they limit the number of facilities. So if you're going to only allow 5 dispensaries in your community, 5 provisioning centers, what process are you going to use to decide which 5? Because if you say you're going to allow 5, you're going to have 50 applicants. So what's the process? I have seen the evaluation and scoring process, which seems to be very common, where the community evaluates the facility plans, the site plan, your security plans, the amount you're investing. And another very common evaluation criteria is what community benefits and charitable contributions are you going to give? And some of these applicants are racing through the community, going to churches and food banks and local leaders and saying, what's your favorite charity in the community? What can I do for the fire department? What can I do for the schools? And they're putting in their application. And you have applicants trying to outbid each other to say how much they're going to do for the community so they can get this license. My question is, that's great. And they're awarding points based on how good your charitable and community benefits plan is. And I say that's great, but the question becomes later, is this enforceable? So if you have someone putting in their application that they're going to give massive donations to everyone's favorite local charity, is the community going to follow up on that? Are they going to hold their feet to the fire? And what are you going to do if they don't follow through? Another thing that they're doing is promising to hire a certain percentage of residents from that city or that community, promising to give them a living wage, benefits, maternity leave, and all of these wonderful things. But again, how is that going to be enforced? And
just one other thing is my impression also is that when you have this much discretion, it's an invitation to lawsuits. Okay, you were going to say that.
Yeah. So that's the evaluation and scoring, and Saul is right. The more subjective criteria you have, the greater likelihood you're going to face a lawsuit over it used to be, we called it disappointed bidder lawsuits in government when someone didn't win a government contract. This is, a disappointed applicant who didn't get a very valuable marijuana license. And almost every community that has a competitive scoring process does face a lawsuit. We've seen it in some of the major communities and even some of the smaller communities. Another one that I'm not a fan of, I'm not afraid to give my opinion here, is the first in line. There was one community that had a process that said the first three applicants in line will get a license, provided that your property fits the zoning criteria. And I really didn't like this at all. For some reason, the first 2 or 3 people knew to get in line about a week before. The first person in line was being offered tens of thousands of dollars to give up his spot. And it just didn't seem to make sense to me. The community's not getting sued, so that's good. But at the same time, it was very frustrating for those that didn't know that they had to be in line. And people were waiting in line for days. I'm more of a fan of the other option, which is the lottery. Because the lottery is almost, to me, litigation proof as long as everything else is in order. You let everyone apply, see if their property fits the zoning. You have a limited number of facilities, and they have to meet certain minimum criteria. And if they do, they're eligible for the lottery. And then it's up to chance. In fact, I have actually talked to people in the industry, the business owners, the entrepreneurs who want to get in this business, and they far prefer a lottery to an evaluation or scoring process where they got to go through and, fill out all these plans and get graded and then wonder just how subjective is this? What do I have to do to make sure that I get the most points possible? So the lottery is something I'm a fan of. And then, Bob, you had something?
Yeah, just from a municipal point of view and over 20 years of experience of doing it, I can tell you that the evaluation scoring process, which we've already said leads to potential litigation, is difficult to get around the arbitrary and capricious standard. typically when you're fighting over a limited number of licenses or whatever it is you're giving out, everyone is going to come to you with the same thing. You're not going to have apples and oranges. You're going to have different types of apples, but they're all going to be apples. It's almost impossible to separate out one from the other because they all see what the other one's doing and they know what the municipality is looking for. The first in line also creates massive problems too. In fact, that was why, at least the municipalities I dealt with and some of the things I've read about, why everybody wanted to opt out on the recreational, because they didn't want somebody being smart enough to say, hey, I filed my application, the statute's less than clear as far as, you know, when we look at the municipalities or code of ordinances to see if we're in there or not. So those, I agree with you. The lottery, I think, is the safest for a municipality as far as hoarding off lawsuits and potential other problems.
Yeah.
Right.
And that the municipality would have to devote resources to evaluate and all that sort of stuff, money that they could spend on it.
There's nothing like the thrill of attending a lottery to see who wins.
Sure. And the other ones, I guarantee you, I've been through it, create nothing but havoc throughout the community as well as on the governing board.
All right.
So Jeff's done. John?
Thank you very much. This is the point in the program, and we've already blown through an hour. It's amazing how fast time flies. A lot of great information. If you haven't done so already, you can go ahead and type your questions into our questions window on your GoToWebinar screen, and we'll try to get to those shortly. It looks like there's a couple, and I'll read this first one. It has a little bit of background to it. So it says the language reads, facilities cannot be located in an area zoned quote-unquote exclusively residential. Our community allows users in residential districts such as neighborhood, commercial/retail, and neighborhood office with special use permit. We also allow churches and schools in residential districts. None of these uses are residential per se, so does that open up our residential district to marijuana facilities?
I guess that depends on what the ordinance says. I mean, I have to read the ordinance. But
You could always adopt a zoning ordinance to ensure that it's not in residential areas.
Exclude it from the special land use.
Yeah.
So that way you have no question about it.
I don't think, but I don't think you could exclude it near. You can't, without doing that, just exclude it because it's not purely residential. In other words,
I mean, it's got to be able to go somewhere,
right,
but just,
exactly.
you might be able to keep it in a certain area.
Right.
Okay, great. Here's another question. What financial benefits are there to communities?
Well, I touched on that earlier. You get $5,000 a year for just permitting an annual permit fee. And then if there's enough money generated throughout the state of Michigan, and after everybody else is paid off, whatever trickles down to the municipality, and it could be a big number, we just don't know yet, the municipality will see some money. Salas touched on the fact that you may have an area in town that maybe is dragging their feet as far as development's concerned, retail-wise, that may pick up because you've got a marijuana facility there. I mean, who knows, maybe a pizza place will open up next door that just happens to coincide with you. Jeff?
Yeah, so I've worked in 3 different communities where they're going to see financial benefits that are not the direct financial benefits, not talking about the application fees, the inspection fees, the tax revenue sharing, but these 3 communities had tax neutral property that they marketed to the cannabis industry, and they are now coming in and building very expensive structures, and now the city is going to see ad valorem property tax revenue from these facilities, and before it was tax neutral property. And in these cases, it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars in revenue every year for these municipalities. This also could be an economic development tool, depending on the needs in your community.
Yeah. And other ancillary benefits result as well. There was a study done in Los Angeles, and they found that crime rates in areas that have opened up retail establishments actually went down. Now, why would that happen? Well, first of all, you have a new use in an area that didn't have use before. Also, these facilities are heavily monitored. Lots of cameras, lots of video cameras and things like that. Literally the last place somebody who wants to do something bad wants to hang out at. So
Yeah.
that's another ancillary benefit that people don't think about.
And the cameras, it's true. I just did an inspection with Laura at a licensed provisioning center last week, and they came in and were literally repositioning the cameras. And this was a very small, 1,000 square foot location that had dozens of cameras. They were repositioning the cameras to make sure that everything 20-foot radius around the building was covered, no blind spots on the corners. The safe where they keep product in cash had a camera on it. Even the DVR, which was recording everything, had to have a camera on it. So and record to the cloud. So if someone tried to screw with that DVR, that they would get caught. So they really are very thorough. Yes, it's the nanny state.
Great. Related question on finance. Are there tax differences between recreational versus medical cannabis?
Yeah, the medical tax was called a marijuana excise tax, was 3%, and I believe the recreational tax is going to be 10%.
Correct.
Great. Two more questions. One is, what do you think about quote unquote private clubs where people can gather, bring their own marijuana to use? Are they permissible under law?
Yes.
Yeah, they are.
Exactly.
As long as they're over 21 and they're not selling any cannabis during that activity.
And they're not out in a public place that doesn't permit it.
Right. I mean, you also have to look at zoning on that particular use as well. I mean, that there's some zoning issues there. You can't just pick any building and open up a social club. You have to make sure that the use is compatible with the zoning district.
Great. Last question. Here's the big one, and I don't know if you guys want to tackle this one. So, do you recommend the city opt out of recreational businesses for now?
Well, I will tell you from a conservative municipal attorney's point of view, if you do not know what you're going to do or you do not want to do it, the safest route, the safest answer is yes. You can always change your mind. You could put a sunset provision in there. The only risk you take in opting out right now, in my opinion, is you may rile up a citizens group that's going to find, and I'm sure they're out there, and maybe my colleagues here can touch on this, organizers who are going around saying, guess what? Your municipality has basically ignored your vote. Let me show you how to do this. So,
So my advice is sort of, get a bunch of lawyers in the room and they'll agree on nothing. I don't see the urgency to opt out immediately. The regs are being developed. There's plenty of time to opt out before December of this year. Plenty of time. And if you do opt out, you will probably rile up. There are, and I've been reading, of groups running around saying, well, if they're going to opt out, and I've seen this on Facebook posts, I've seen this on Twitter, in other areas where
Well,
they're
it
saying,
must be true then.
yeah, well, no, but what they're doing is they're organizing. What they're saying is, hey, if your community is opting out, we have a way to help you make sure that you can get opted back in, and we'll help you set up your thing. So it's a really fine line, but I think Jeff is absolutely right that Berkeley's doing it the right way. Get a gauge of your community, but there's no reason you have to opt out before you do that. You have plenty of time. There's no rush in opting out, and I think you send the wrong message if you just opt out on a knee-jerk kind of reaction.
So I'm a former full-time municipal employee, and I see both sides of this. Solid, you're right. There's no urgency, but if I were sitting there and my phone was ringing off the hook from very aggressive industry folks that wanted to locate in my community, and I wanted to focus on other work, I would go opt out to sort of, settle it down for a while, and we can go back to come back to the drawing board later. I know in a lot of communities, especially when medical was new, a lot of city managers, city planners, city attorneys were getting bombarded with interest, and they just couldn't keep up with the calls and the interest, and then they found it hard to focus on other things they were doing. So that's another consideration.
well, and again, coming from a city attorney point of view, one of the concerns I still have, and as do many city attorneys and township attorneys in Michigan, is what happens if you do have somebody who applies now, even though the regs aren't in place,
right,
and there's enough money at stake that they decide to file a lawsuit and say, you know what, you didn't opt out on March 1st. That's when I applied, and as far as we're concerned under the law, we're it. Now, I know that, just don't say that. I know there's a disagreement on that, but again, do you want to litigate that and pay lawyers to go ahead and try to resolve that issue in the courts, or do you want to just take the safe route and opt out? Now, if you're going to opt out, again, I understand both points of view as well.
Sanctions and attorney's fees, somebody files suit.
All right.
Under Rule 11.
Great, thank you very much. There are a couple other questions, but we're really getting past our time, so we'll follow up on those directly with folks. And one of the things we've done too is we've tried to share around any last-minute questions and answers following our program. So we really do want to try to keep things on time. So at this point, I'm going to wrap it up. I got a couple of quick notes for you. Right after we're done today, we're going to send you a survey. We really value that input that you give us, feedback regarding everything from the use of the conference call system right on through to subjects and topics you'd like us to cover in the future. So we hope you will take a moment to complete that survey when it comes your way. The other thing I want to remind everybody of, I mentioned it earlier, is that this program is being recorded, and the audio recording with the slides in a kind of accompanying video fashion will be available on our website. The link at the bottom will be available probably in a day or two, so just give us a couple days on that. And you can feel free to share that to other colleagues around that hadn't had a chance to participate today. And the last thing we really want to try to make you aware of, if you don't know, we do here at Plunkett Cooney have a very popular blog called the Cannabis Law Blog. We do our best to keep that blog populated frequently on all kinds of information about the cannabis laws here in Michigan in particular, but we also have some expertise outside of the state, and we try to cover those kinds of issues as frequently as possible. So we encourage you to register. You can easily sign up by email, and then an alert will be pushed your way whenever we have new content. So at this point, I want to thank everybody very much for attending. It was a really good discussion, and we hope you agree. Hope to see you at our next program, and have a great rest of the day.